Welcome to episode 40. Check out what we have in store for you this week. We've learned things about setting up websites, managing social media, editing, creating websites.
What to say and what not to say,
How
like
to
that.
decide to delete an episode after you've recorded it.
Yeah. Literally, communications course could be a thing.
I don't think so. You probably should just
You don't think it
that
fits?
one. Nah.
Yeah, you should probably skip that. They don't have a way of doing podcasting. I create the images because I love you, but it's a bad idea the other way around. So we both have our responsibilities.
Josh's stuff is great. My stuff, you don't need to see the things I wrote on napkins. Well, folks, we are both here, even though it might feel like I'm sitting around doing nothing at the moment. Josh and I are back for another episode of the High Tech Podcast.
We are going strong on season 2. No cancellations yet.
Yeah, right? They haven't axed us.
Yeah. Our network that doesn't exist hasn't access.
The hashtag no sponsors have not
Hashtag
unsponsored
no
us.
sponsor. Yeah, I'm sure if NBC wanted to cancel us, they'd find a way. You know what I mean?
There's some
like
truth.
they canceled Firefly, they can find a way to cancel us. I went there.
Rest in peace. You went so hard with that one. Yeah, every episode Josh and I, try and pass off who starts and all this other stuff, and that's really only as effective as us reading who's going to be the opener. So we always just have this moment at the beginning of an episode, kind of looking at each other in Zoom, like quietly, like, was it you? Was it me? Was he? Oh crap! You're waiting for me to do it. Okay, I'll go.
I mean, it's not like we set up a system for this now. It's not like there's literally a thing that tells us who the opener is for that episode.
I had scrolled down and had completely lost it. So it's me. We're here.
It's fine.
Welcome back, folks. As always, now, or at least for the time being, we want to remind you all we have Twitter. We have a website. We have an email. To find us in those places, usually it's something like High Tech Pod or High Tech Podcast.
Yeah.
In the case of Twitter, High Tech Podcast. In the case of our website, High Tech Pod. Either way, you can find us. We're out there.
We like to mix it up, Like a marketing team would probably not be happy about the way we did it, but we are. So
yeah, I think High Tech Podcast was taken for the website or something. I forget.
It definitely was.
That was the worst part.
Taken.
We got the Twitter like that, no problem. But the domain, wasn't
the
available.
domain
for us.
somewhere out there. You own hightechpodcast.com or .us, and
we want it.
Who on you? Give up the domain and give it to us.
Or
That's
we
the
will
solution.
have NBC cancel you.
Yeah, we have the power.
We will send them for you.
Yeah, 100%.
Oh my gosh. Well, we're back. This is episode 40. We are stoked for this conversation today because, frankly, it's one of our favorites. It's something that we believe in, clearly. It's something that we do.
It's a thing we do. Yeah.
Josh, I think you said you've got it in a couple classes. I know I've advocated for it for years.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's simply enough.
And the thing we're going to talk about is
podcasting.
Video game.
That
was another episode.
Darn it. I mean, that's another one of our favorite topics, and we have been advocating for it for years.
Yeah, and we talked about it in season 1. Go check it out if you haven't listened to it.
Boom, boom. Yeah, podcasting. I mean, Josh, what was your first podcast? Like, when did you start doing it? A year ago with me, or like have you been listening to podcasts for years?
Are you talking about like doing a podcast or
like,
listening
like
to a
podcasts
podcast?
in general? Yeah, listening.
Yeah, like okay. I mean, like doing a podcast. It's this. I've never done a podcast before.
Yeah.
I mean, I've talked a lot. It's like
No.
I feel like I should have just recorded it. But I mean, like I've listened to podcasts for years up to this point. I mean, like I feel like it's not a thing that's unique anymore. Like everybody listens to podcasts now.
It's
a
as
thing.
unique as someone coming up to you and be like, dude, I've heard of this new thing. It's all the rage. It'll get so many people into our school. We should do a MOOC. It's like, maybe that died in 1999 when they tried it the first time.
Yes. Yeah, no. So I mean, podcasts have been around for a while. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of like my first ever podcast that I listened to. I really can't remember what it was. It was something on Apple because that's where podcasts pretty much only existed early on in the early days.
Right, unless you got them like peer to peer, like shared them between people.
Yeah, and then like I really got into it through nerddom. Like I got into nerdy Marvel podcasts and gaming podcasts and all those fun things, and also like theology and stuff like that.
Okay.
I didn't know they were podcasts at the time, but they're podcasts. Yeah, this is kind of, I don't know, this is my realm, but this is the first one I've ever actually like done. Other than like I think I've done something similar in a class activity once a long time ago. Like
Sure,
I feel like
sure.
somewhere in college
Like a
I did a
project or something.
podcast project thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I love doing it. I think this is like a fun activity where you and I know, like, we've learned things about setting up websites, managing social media, editing,
Yeah.
creating web.
What to
like,
say and what not to say,
how
things like that.
how to decide to delete an episode after you've recorded it, like how to
Yeah.
how to decide when to stop recording.
I feel like we've learned more of what not to do.
Oh yeah,
Like we haven't quite found the right thing yet, but we've found what all the other options we don't want to do are.
well, and I've also been pretty like, I guess, astounded by like talking to peers and stuff who podcast to find out that really everybody's making it up, unless you're like Corridor Crew, right? They've probably got a huge team at this point, or like they all know.
Well,
what
they're not
doing.
like a podcast. They create legitimate videos.
Well, and media, yeah.
They have a podcast. They literally do a podcast on top of all the billion other things that they do.
Right. Or Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
Joe Rogan's got a crew. He's got to have a crew or something. Like, but talking to Irv, like Glenn Irvin, when we spoke with him a couple of episodes ago, I think now at this point, finally it's coming out. They had their own method of just getting it done when he started his podcast and other things like that. So it's pretty interesting that most folks who get into this just figure it out. There's always some sort of somebody pays for a software or you get a free software. It's not a big deal. I know what I was thinking about this though, and why I asked you about that is I didn't realize that I had participated in podcasting as like a 13 or 14-year-old. I had an anime website that I was a part of. We had a forum, and at that time of my life, we decided to make a radio show for the forum. Literally,
Sorry.
yeah,
Like everybody now has a picture of what Little Will looks like in high school.
yeah. Just take the
like
glasses.
At 13,
I didn't have
and
glasses.
it's not a flattering one when you say I started an anime website and then we started a radio show. Like
It was yeah. We did news about the
it'd
forum.
be super cool now. Like if you did that now,
my
you'd be the
God.
coolest person ever.
That's amazing. You're right. Today, if I did that, it might make money.
Like today, we rule the world. That'd be the coolest podcast ever. There's also a billion of them now. You were
That's
an
hilarious.
early adopter.
Well, and it was meant for our community, right? So we did we ran forums and stuff. So we'd be like, hey, next week we're gonna launch this new feature in the forum, and next month we're starting an RPG if you want to join. Like that was the stuff we were talking. And then like we've added XYZ episodes to the website, and it was something else. But then I didn't touch it for 15 years. You know what I mean? Like I did that like in middle school, high school for a minute. And then we only just started this in 2020, so it was quite some time between that. But yeah, I've loved this. It's been a fun practice. Now, besides our storytelling about it, like podcasting, I think for an educational purpose serves a couple of values to your classroom. Like, of course, it should first and foremost come back to your outcomes. What are you trying to teach your students? Like, I would say if you're trying to teach your students, I don't know, welding, a podcasting activity might not be effective. I don't know, maybe. But
yeah, I have a hard pressed time to figure out how it would be, but I'm sure
if you could make the
maybe
case, you could make the case.
find a way to
But,
make
like,
that work. I don't know.
A literature course doesn't seem too hard to come up with a podcast idea for that, for like an academic purpose. Theology course, an engineering
Communications course. Literally, communications course could be a thing. Like,
No, I don't think so. You probably should just skip
you don't think
that
it fits?
one. Nah.
Yeah, you should probably skip that. They don't have a way of doing podcasting.
Engineering, maybe not, right? Like engineering, you need to focus on whatever you do, and I don't know, physics, something.
Wow, we know nothing about those topics.
But-
It's very clear quickly on this podcast when we have no idea what a topic's about. Like, it's like we start talking, we're like, oh yeah, we don't really know what that is. Whatever you guys do,
Whatever engineers
stuff,
like with pencils,
your
and
things, you get with pencils.
and graphic paper, I guess.
That's all they got, right? That's their thing.
I don't know.
That's the graphic pencil paper thing.
But
Anyway, yeah, no, like,
yeah, go for it.
I mean, like, it's a creative avenue to create kind of an activity through, and I think it can fit in a lot of different places. So, like, you and I are talking about this. I do actually have some experience in podcasting and education, not necessarily like doing it, but we have courses in the online programming that I'm involved in that do this activity. And we've used WordPress before to do it, like another tool we've talked about in the past in high tech. But I think there's just an advantage to having students create content in a different way, and it also engages students differently. So I think one of the ways I've tried to explain this to people is you can think through, like, sure, you can have students come together, do a group activity to write a paper, right? That they're going to do. And I'm not saying it's not good, but what would it look like to actually have them, instead of write a paper, like come together in a group activity and create a podcast series on that topic? There's a lot of similar carryover. Like, okay, so you're going to try to think about the movements of the paper, right? You're going to think about the different topics that you're writing, how they fit together. You have to do that in a podcast as well. You have to think through how your episodes,
should.
Maybe you should.
It's helpful if you do that.
In a short project like this, you could set
Right.
how many episodes they're going to do. You could set like how they need to outline the episodes. There's stuff that you can do. Okay. It obviously looks a little bit different in the wild when you're doing a podcast like we do, where we're just continually talking about a large topic. So although I will say we outline and plan out how things are happening. So
Josh and I have gotten more and more, I think, official or better outlines since we started the podcast. You know, like we originally would just like, right, topic, question, go. But you know, when we dig into something that we might not be as familiar with, like we put together an outline. There's always bullet points, references, links, etc. And that's just for us to put this together because we care. But if you had your students doing it, like that should be a no-brainer. They should have to do that kind of stuff.
And the examples I remember instructor we know well, and that he did this in his class on like historical figures, and like theologians, I think at the time, because it was a religion class. Okay, so this might be coming back to you now.
Yep, it is.
He did a podcast where they had to do stuff about these topics, and he has awesome stories of students getting like super engaged and like going way overboard with how they do stuff, because they like really enjoyed creating this podcast, because at the end of the day they were able to actually like talk to each other and plan out, and really cool conversations came out of those podcasts that they were able to. Now I think what I like to see, some people do like a debrief after they do a podcast activity. They'll do like, the students have to debrief on kind of what they've learned, like kind of a reflective activity at the end of it. And I think that's helpful when you do something like this, like have them reflect on what they've learned through the podcast, not just doing stuff, so that they can kind of take away what they've done through it. But there was a lot of benefit to that. And he actually did a thing where he had like the students become different parts of the podcast. Like they had roles, right? And we can attest to this because you and I have roles in our podcast. I don't edit because that's a bad idea. Okay. And I create the images because I love you, but it's a bad idea the other way around. So we both have our responsibilities.
Josh's stuff is great. My stuff, you don't need to see the things I wrote on napkins, folks.
So the point though is that he had them select roles. So there was like an editor, there was a person who started kind of drafting the content, there was a person who created the web pages for stuff. Like he had people kind of take roles. Yeah. And within that, he found that students just took a lot more responsibility and found a lot, kind of had this creative element to the activity that had them engage in a whole different way. And he still had them write papers through the course. Some do a whole bunch of stuff, but they were basically releasing a podcast episode every week in this online course.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
And I think that like the opportunity for the students, of course, is to dig deep into the content. That's fantastic. There's nothing wrong with that. The students then get the chance to work together, and they, you know, there's something to like a skill of podcasting, learning the software, learning, you know, whatever the platforms are, that kind of thing. But then you know that they've really like, I don't know. I think there's easy ways to fake papers, right? Like I've faked a few papers and I gotten good grades on them. You know, like, and I don't mean fake by cheat. I mean like just make it up, you know, like, all right, I can write a good thesis, I can write the statement. I've written papers for things I don't believe in, you know what I mean, and gotten a good grade. So clearly it's stuff that is possible. But with this, it's long form, and they're talking, and unless they script it, which is pretty not typical, you're gonna hear their real thoughts, their real opinions come out in the scope of it, and that's awesome.
Yeah, and conversation generates out of it. I think that's the cool thing with podcasts. It's the whole reason, I think at the end of the day, why people like listening to podcasts is because they like the chemistry and the conversation between the people who are doing it. Like they like that component of the podcast. That's why I listen. There's some podcasts I listen to that I don't even really care about the topic. Like, I just like the people doing it.
Wow,
but
yeah.
so the whole point of that, though, is that really good. The reason we gravitate towards that is because good conversation comes out of that. And so podcasts allow for that conversation to dwell and deepen on topics in new and creative ways. And I think that's what I really like about it. Now, I want to flip this on its head a little bit too. I think there's another way to use podcasts in education besides student activities. So what I've found really beneficial recently is thinking about doing podcast content as an instructor for your courses. So like the way that most am seeing this right now is like in blended and online courses. A lot of instructors just doing straight like lecture videos, and we've talked about lecture before. I don't have a problem with lecture. I like lecturing. I think when done well, it can be effective. It's not great when the video is 4 hours long. But there's this really cool thing where I've been seeing some people, and we've been doing in some of our courses, actually getting two different instructors together to do like a podcast style videos for courses. I reference online and blended because it's where it fits well, but you can do this also in your classroom, like literally set up basically a podcast in the classroom with the students watching.
Right.
Like two people getting together and talking around a certain topic. So that's another place I think podcasting can fit really well. It's just, again, at the core, podcasting isn't anything like super magical. It's just like it's two people talking.
Right.
Or it's, multiple people
and
talking.
It's not hard.
It could be even one person talking, but I find those more boring. So I like the multiple person conversation. I think is helpful. And at the end of the day, those could be used in multiple different avenues, whether it's an activity with a student, having them do something, or you even producing content as an instructor to do it. Now, Will, while we're talking about this, let's move conversation in this direction. If somebody was to come and ask you and I, what would be kind of like the top, if they're going to do podcast activity with students, what would be kind of the top couple things that you would say you need to get into place or you need to help with the students with? Like, how would you design a podcast activity?
Yeah. Yeah, the very first thing for me is like you have to determine is it one student, paired students, or groups of students. Groups above 3 is actually, I think, going to be difficult when it comes to, and Josh and I know this 100%, so well through this, like, and we're on Zoom. We live 5 minutes away from each other. We could probably do the podcast at the same room at this point, but like everything that started in the pandemic, we've just done it from our own houses. When you can see each other on Zoom and it's two people, you can at least like read lips and stuff and read each other enough to be like, oh, he's going to talk, let me not talk, or he wants to talk, let him talk. You do that with 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, like it can be really hard to manage conversation, and not keep it and keep it from being chaotic or whatever. So if you're having the students do it by themselves, there's going to be some burden, of course, to them doing the editing, them figuring out how to host it, like all that. One person has to do everything. If you do groups, that's great. Maybe you do do pairs if you're going to make all the students talk to each other. But I would say 3s or 4s are still possible, where you might prioritize only 2 people speaking. Like, I think that podcasting and public speaking is still not for everybody. So there's space in those group projects to maybe let it be, 2 speakers, an editor, and, the scripter or writer or something. You know what I mean? Like, you could have a podcast with 4 people or 3 people where not everybody talks, or not everybody talks every episode, but you get to share the roles and stuff around, right? Because to me, that kind of design about the podcast really is maybe 3 or 4 things, right? How long do you want it to be? Does each episode have to be, I'd say, unilateral? Like, do they have to talk about something or one thing every episode, or can it just has to be on the topic? And then you need to design who is doing the talking. So it's kind of time, the content, and the who, or how it's designed for the people. You get those 3 things together, and you could probably get this done. We're going to talk about, a software system that can help you like deliver it and stuff like that. But, even the one that Josh and I are going to suggest today is not perfect for bigger groups. It's perfect for a single person doing their own podcast, right? They can do the entire podcast entirely through the platform by themselves, but if you have a group, suddenly you have 2 people. And if they're not together, if they have to record from separate locations, getting those files together and files edited, like that's a complication. So those are the things like you need to square away at step 1, so how much of a burden you're putting on the students, right? Because even with a 10-page, 15-page, 20-page paper, if we do that in a group project, that you kind of assign people in those contexts to, do different roles or different pieces. It's atypical that you're going to have, 2 or 3 students working on a 20-page paper where they all have to write something on all 20 pages. Right? Mm-hmm. You might let the students say one person does the introduction, somebody does the body, somebody does the conclusion, or whatever. Or you might just let them figure it out. One person does the drafting, but somebody else has to do the editing, but whatever. Same thing in the podcasting. And what it comes down to for podcasting is you need somebody who's ready to produce it, right? Production is how it gets recorded, how the notes are taken or organized, what content's going to be talked about. Like, that's a producer. An editor has to take all of that content on the other side and boil it down into a single episode. And editing goes in a whole bunch of different directions, right? I edit our podcast in probably the simplest way, short of just throwing the episodes up there, right? I open it up, I add a beginning and an ending, I look for a couple of clips, and I let it roll. Like, very, very rarely do I listen through the entire episode and clip out every second of dead air, clip out me hitting the microphone, there's stuff like that I just don't do. But if you wanted these students to put together a 10 or 15 minute podcast that doesn't have dogs barking in the background and has specific stuff at the beginning and different stuff that gets so much more complicated. So you have to be ready to train the students on how to edit and how to make that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think it depends what you're doing. Like, if you're doing a podcast, like, I asked that question, but at the same time, I think it depends on what type of course you're doing it. If you are doing it like a communications course where they should know how to do all this stuff, that's a totally different story. You're going to add different layers of complexity to it. They're expected to know. Again, it comes all back to your outcomes. If you're in a course where they don't need to, like I'm in a literature course, a theology course, or I'm in a history course, and at the end of the day, they're not leaving this course as an outcome knowing how to edit podcasts, then for goodness sakes, just don't care with the dogs in the background. Like, right. At the end of the day, it doesn't change the outcome of the activity is that they're producing content with the intention of learning something from it. You're trying to achieve an outcome to it. So I think at the end of the day, you have to kind of decide what is the boundaries. Like, how long do you want these episodes to be? Remember, you've got to grade these, okay, as well. So if you ask them to do
I'm so glad
hour-long episodes each time, I have some instructors who've done this, where they'll do something like this, and they have like hour-and-a-half episodes worth of content, and they've got 20 students in the course, and they've broken them out to groups of 2 different people, so they got 10 different like podcast episodes to listen to.
And you mentioned
in a week,
our friend and colleague who you mentioned.
Yeah,
I remember him telling me about this, like coming into work some days, because he would listen to them in the car on his drive to work. Right, like he was trying to find time. He had to make time in his day. He was listening to them 100%. In the shower. You know what I mean? Like, he was doing anything he possibly could to listen to the podcast because it took a lot of time to get through them.
Yeah. To get through all
even on double speed.
Do yourself and your students a favor. Work around that. I recommend, like, if you're going to do this continually, I recommend like 20-minute range. I think is like good for this type of thing.
Yep.
Remember, in this podcast activity, you're not going to literally have them creating all this content, releasing it all once. Ideally, you'd have them do this throughout the course. And so I would do maybe 20, 25 minutes tops, and then they're going to be creating multiple episodes. So that'll eventually build into a lot of discussion and conversation and content that will lead to learning. But I think kind of breaking that out, because it helps them pick stuff up. I think defining how well produced you want these videos or these recordings to be. If you're in a course where that's a part of the outcome, sure. If you're not, then you know what? Let them have some freedom to do what they want to do. Some students will give you straight audio of what they talked about from beginning to end, barely editing it other than to making sure it's in your required time limit. And some students will go crazy and add intro music and like segments and noises, and that's great.
And they'll discover they have a passion for podcasts. Whoa.
Yeah, allow them to have the creativity to do that. I think that area, giving them the flexibility, making it making it an activity that's not a barrier, but giving them flexibility to take it further and to engage with it. I think it's kind of the sweet spot when you're doing a lot of these in courses where the end result isn't that they become master podcasters. So that's my piece. A couple other things before we jump into our tool. Set clear guidelines. Definitely have kind of like kind of low stakes onboarding to this. Maybe have them do kind of like an intro episode that's kind of, they don't have to do a lot of research or setup, but they're mainly focusing on just getting their flow for how they do the episodes. And I would encourage, you don't have to do this, but I prefer like making them put the audio somewhere creative, like a site or like some place that they can put it to kind of just add that extra layer to it. Now, obviously, you can do it if you're using like an LMS. You could also, I've seen people just basically they upload their audio files to a discussion and people listen to them. That's fine. But I like taking it a little bit of a step farther, kind of making it more of a fun creativity or creative activity. Yeah. So that's the one area I would throw. And then the last thing I want to throw in here to my recommendation are two things. Sorry, they keep adding on. Encourage your students to outline stuff, to do some of that. Like, don't just have them straight record. I think it is helpful, not necessarily to script, but to like outline their stuff. Like what a kind of low stakes onboarding I could think of doing this is literally having them do like a practice episode. And while they're doing a practice episode that week, also have them maybe like outline what their first, several episodes are going to look like. So they can kind of get a feel of what they're going to be doing. You want to try to use some of that time to get that out of the way. So then when they get started actually creating content, they can focus on it and they can focus on the research that they're probably going to have to do if they have to do that.
Here's a doubling up point on that outlining thing. So hold on to your second thought yet, because I want to hear that still. But this happened to our colleague, and I know it's happened to us at some levels. This is the internet. This is technology. This is Voodoo and Gremlins. Things happen to episodes. We've lost recordings. Our friend lost. Students lost. Those outlines are also really helpful in those moments when the students are freaking out. We thought we recorded it. Somebody didn't hit the button. Somebody deleted it by accident. The USB drive it was on got lost. Whatever happens, right? That outline.
Was this early 2000s?
Well, it's not. Some of the students were. That outlining step can be at least something where you can be like, hey, just submit your outline to me. I want to see that you have notes. I want to see that you had something prepared for the episode, and I'll give you a day to, go record it or something like that. Like, it's just it's a proof that they didn't just mess around with you and not record that week, right? Like, if they take the effort, they put the outline together. It is a nice thing that they could submit as an artifact if something else happened, or just to say like, hey, this is how I brought my ideas together. What was your other thing?
Okay, so last thing here, and this is the one that you might not like as much because you're my tool guy on this episode. Okay, pick one darn tool to recommend to them. Okay, so I feel bad because I feel like this is just us using this colleague as an example, and if he listens to this, he never will, but if he does, he's gonna know who I'm talking about. I'll never forget the day I had to review the activity that he set up on this as a technologist, and seeing that he had recommended 5 different podcasting platforms to the students. Stop it. Stop. There's no reason to do that. Okay. My general practice is this. I pick the tool that I most likely want the students to do, with one exception. I leave a door open if the student has a tool they already know better, that they're able to do that tool. Because at the end of the day, I want them to do whatever they're most comfortable with.
Right.
So, like, if it's not going to ruin how I'm grading their activities, I don't care. But I'm not going to suggest Anchor, the other tools. I'm trying to think through, like WordPress.
Right.
Sorry.
It's just this is as much as you know about podcasting equipment as I do about engineering.
Yeah, so I don't know. I'm like throwing a blank. Zencaster. Sorry.
Right.
I'm throwing a blank for podcasting tools right now. So. Like, he suggested all of these different tools, and I would not do that. And here's why. I would suggest one, because that also gives you the ability to, the kind of addendum to this is, do the work to find guidance that tool gives on how to use it.
Yeah.
And provide that to your students. Don't expect that they're just going to be able to open it up and start recording. That's not how it works. It's not that simple. Make sure you have that information ahead of time for them, whether you have a physical class, you can walk through it with them in class, or you're doing an online course and you just need to provide guidance. Most of these podcasting tools are good enough that they've got help guidance on how to use their tools.
Right.
So go looking for that and find the right. Most of them will have like a getting started guide that you can provide to your students. and do that. But pick one tool, one only.
Josh and I have been doing this now a little under a year, but we've used a couple different tools in the process of ours, like Exploration and we've been pretty consistent on how we record and edit. But like, even when we use something for an interview with another person, right? We pick up a tool that we don't use every day, and so it's like, oh crap, do we do this again? Is there a chat in here? Can we see each other? Why can't There's been a couple times we tried to do interviews and Josh's audio won't work. It's like we are quote unquote hobby professionals. Like, we do this regularly, and yet it still doesn't work for us, right?
Yeah,
so
it throws off us sometimes.
Make sure your students who may have zero experience with this reduce that burden reduce that stress. They don't need one more thing that's going to piss them off, scare them, frustrate them in the process. Just keep it simple.
Oh, and the small thing that we've been talking about relatively is think about assigning roles in the activity. If you do groups, think about assigning out who's going to do what. Like, because there is different roles to it. There's editing. There's different, think about trying to do that in the groups. I think that's very beneficial. The person we know who did this, it was very beneficial to do that.
Yeah.
And it helps carry some of the weight. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I just had that thought. I was like, we've been kind of referencing it, but we never actually explicitly stated
Make sure
that was a thing that you should do.
Yeah. Well, if you do an assignment where it's just one student doing a podcast by themselves, like, you need to know that they are taking on all those roles. So be sensitive.
Yeah.
If you give it to just
Keep it
one student, right? Keep it maybe shorter time frame if it's one student by themselves. Maybe the content's simpler.
Yeah.
Here's my last twist on this conversation topic before the app. Right? We're talking about podcasting for education, and we kind of come in with this assumption like, here's how you would set up your students to podcast for it. That's not the only way to use podcasting in education, right? Like Josh was saying, maybe you do your own lectures or whatever, but just pick and use podcasts. Let the students listen to podcasts. 100%. Or I think something that's really, really cool and really important about your students creating these podcasts is have them share them with the class. Like, do something where they are interacting with each other's podcasts, right? So, it's great to have them just be going and producing them, but there's a value to listening to podcasts, to maybe doing like critiques. Like, that could be week 1. If you're going to do a podcast activity in your course, maybe week 1 is just listening to other podcasts and doing critiques. You know what I mean? Maybe you can find something that's relevant to your topic area, or you could tell them to just go listen to their own, so that they have a sense of the flow of a podcast. Like Josh and I did. Josh has listened to a lot more podcasts, I think, than I have. But when we started thinking about doing this, I started listening to more podcasts because I wanted to hear how people started their episodes. Did people use music or not? If they use music, did they use it the entire episode? Like, those are things that you don't necessarily know you want to know, but listening to other really good podcasts can be very helpful. So that can help them figure out like the technical stuff, but it could also just be an activity for your course. Like, go and listen to this podcast and write reviews or write critiques on it. It doesn't even have to be creating. Using podcasts for instructional material is super, super important. And frankly, it can really anchor them in the material that you're working on. You can just keep them really situated.
Can really anchor them in there. So the tool we're talking about today is a tool that Will and I use every week. We're not sponsored by them.
Hashtag not a sponsor.
Hashtag not a sponsor, but we do run our podcast through them. It's called Anchor. So Anchor is one of the major podcast platforms that people use. It's connected to Spotify. It's run by the company that runs Spotify. I think the reason we wanted to talk about it a little bit is because we do think it has some value in this area. I think I'll be upfront. My big thing with Anchor that isn't always going to work perfectly is their editing stuff isn't like, they don't have a lot of editing tools in their software.
Sure.
So if you want them to do a lot of editing for the podcast, you're going to have to do something else on top of Anchor. But the thing I really like about Anchor is I think it's also very simple to upload content into and release episodes. Like, it's pretty easy to do that through. I mean, you and I do that for this podcast, for the High Tech Podcast, very easily. I mean, we've kind of gotten to a good flow with how Anchor works.
Yeah, and with ours, right, I do all the editing in a third-party software because I know it, like it, it's free. And then I take that final episode and I upload it straight to Anchor. But the idea here would be with a single student or maybe like a small group of students, they could upload their audio tracks in there, and then like it has this very simple like kind of click and drag and drop editor system where they could put in like music beforehand or over the introduction and stuff like that. But it's in that process of like directly recording it into the platform that they could do it so simply if it was like one person, right? A single person could go to Anchor, sign up for an account, click record in the platform, do their 10 minutes, save it, and then it's done and it's available to you. It's so cool how easy that is. And frankly, it's one of those things that I think democratizes access to this platform, because like Josh mentioned early on, like, oh yeah, it used to be you had to go to Apple to get podcasts, and I was like, yeah, or you had to do like peer-to-peer, like the RSS feeds of the old days were the only way to get podcasts. You subscribe to a feed if somebody was putting one out, and I don't know how they set them up, right? But you'd subscribe to an RSS feed, and anytime they put a podcast episode out, it directly downloaded to whatever device you set the feed up with. That's a lot of technical knowledge, and you have to understand that stuff, and you have to know where to look for them. And frankly, you had to go to somebody's website to get their RSS feed. Today, something like Anchor becomes a central point for you to put your episode, and it will send it out. It sends it to Apple, Spotify, all these other third-party ones. Like, it makes it very easy to Google Podcasts. It makes it very easy to get to a podcast and to distribute it. So that's one of those things that, like, if you want your students in one place to, record it, put it together, and send it out, boom, Anchor. It's completely free, no cost, no issue.
Yeah, now in your education activity, you're probably not going to necessarily have them sending them out to all the podcast platforms like we do, but it creates an Anchor site that your students can link to. So, like, that's the other place you always got to think about. How do I have my students submit this work to me? One of the things that I'm really a big fan of is, while yes, they can go in and submit work, it'd be nice if they just kind of had a site where their episodes uploaded week to week that you can go look at. And that maybe early on in the course they're submitting to you their link. That's kind of their first deliverable, right? Is let's get the website up and running and maybe do like a test episode. Yeah, and then from then on, you can kind of be checking it on a weekly basis. You can even encourage other students to listen to each other's podcasts. Like, there's kind of cross-listening that can happen really easily. And Anchor gives you the ability to do all that stuff. The other thing I really like about Anchor, one, it's free, which we love that, which is why we use it. But students can customize it. They can add images to it. But the other thing I really like about the editing backend that we don't use much because of the way we do our podcast, but for education would be really helpful, is you can easily get, like, they provide like default transitions and music and stuff that you can use inside the podcast. So it makes it easy for your students to be creative with the episode without having to go looking for a whole bunch of stuff for their podcast. So I think that's what I really like about Anchor as well, is that it's super easy to get some of that stuff into your episode, and for education would be super easy to do that as well. And then also, at the end of the day, what I like about these types of activities is that hopefully somebody out of this also gets a bug for doing this, and they enjoy it, and they find a new passion that they like to do. Using an actual platform that is a real podcasting platform like Anchor allows them to get their feet wet in a real platform, not just recording audio in their LMS and submitting it to the course. And so that's what I really like. That, and Anchor's built for this. Like, Canvas, I love you, but you're not built for people recording podcasts, okay? That's not what they're built for. So that's Anchor's made for it. So it's going to make the experience easier for your students because the tool's designed to do what you're asking them to do. And so that's what I like about Anchor. I think it's a good solution. There's other solutions out there, but I think Anchor is just an easily accessible tool, and it doesn't take a lot to learn it. That's why I think I really like Anchor.
If your students are recording more than one person, they cannot. I don't think they're going to just do that straight in the Anchor. Like, I've looked. I'm pretty sure you can't record 2 audio files at the same time in Anchor, and that's the bummer. If it could do that, it would be the end all be all. Josh and I would simplify our entire process. I wouldn't be doing what we do every week to edit episodes and get it done. But
here's a simple solution. Right. Like in education, especially, like if they're doing it together, like they're recording it, put them on Zoom. Have Zoom do the recording. They just download the audio and they throw it into Anchor.
That's what I was going to suggest.
Like it's not that hard to do that
if
solution.
They get caught up in the fact of like, oh, Anchor doesn't have the feature to record both of us, that's going to be a breakdown for them. But it's like, no, just send them over to Zoom, do a Zoom recording. At the end, you got to make sure you set your Zoom recording features to give you like the audio file separately. But you can just take that audio file, boom, upload it straight into Anchor. You're done.
Well, you could do video too. Anchor actually does video now, so or they will be doing video. This whole thing, man. Spotify's doing video podcasts now, so That's a side thing that High Tech maybe's been looking into.
What?
I don't know what you're talking about. Video? What? No, ridiculous. So they do that. So if you wanted to do something like that as well, Anchor's a good platform for that. So in general, I just think Anchor's one that we can comfortably come to you on the podcast and say we've been using it for almost a year. We release everything through it. It's super nice. And even for your students, they can record stuff ahead of time and publish it to release on the dates they need it to. Like, that's what we do. I mean, what are you talking about? We record the week of every time.
We record this at 5 a.m.
We never
every Tuesday.
record ahead of time. Whatever week you're listening to that right now, we just recorded it at 5 a.m. that
It's
Tuesday.
definitely still 2021 as we record this episode. It's fine.
Shh. You don't
Fourth
reveal
wall,
that.
baby.
It's 2023. We time traveled.
That's awesome.
So anyway, check it out. Go check out Anchor, Anchor.fm, right?
Anchor.fm is their website.
The thing. I should know this. I go there every week.
It's a bookmark.
So anyway, with that said, yeah, go check it out. Anchor. So thank you for joining us again, guys, for another episode. Just kind of a little wrap up here. On our next episode, we're going to be talking about should we standardize online courses or not. This is a fun topic for Will and I. I don't know, some of you may not care, but we're gonna let the opinions fly. I don't know where we both stand on some of these opinions.
I can't wait.
And then it's gonna be great. And then we're gonna talk about a tool called IORAD.
I
right?
think so.
I said it right.
It's
I
how
did
it's
it.
spelled.
Okay, cool. This is a Will package. So I don't know this one as well, but I will by the time we were talking about this. So next week we're gonna be talking about those two things. Should we standardize online courses? And we'll be taking a look at the app IORAD and what it can be used for. So just again, a reminder before we leave you to your own life, and you no longer have to hear our beautiful voices. Just remember, we're online. We're there. We're on Twitter. We're going to keep saying it until enough people follow us. So if you're annoyed by it and you're not following us, follow us.
This is like the YouTube thing. Click subscribe now.
Yeah, just do it. I know it feels like blackmail. That's because it is.
You're
but
here,
you should
aren't
follow
you?
us anyway. You should. Yeah, you're listening to us. Come on. So at High Tech Podcast is our Twitter handle. Make sure to subscribe. Follow us on Twitter. Talk to us. We want to talk to people. We want to actually know who's listening to us. You guys, some of you are obscure humans that we don't actually know who you are.
We still want to know who's listening from the Czech Republic. Like we have questions.
Yeah, I don't know who you are, but hit us up on Twitter. So, and then also check out our website, hightechpod.us. We put tons of cool resources on there every episode. If you've been listening to us and not checking out our website, every episode you listen to has some type of page with it, with context about the app that we do, links to help guides on it, how to get started with it. Goal is kind of that you can take that and get started with whatever app we talk about. So check us out at hightechpod.us. And then our Anchor handle, anchor.fm/hightechpod. You can also find all of our episodes and all of us on your favorite platform straight from Anchor. So check us out online, and make sure you talk to us. We want to hear from you. So thank you again, guys, for another week joining us as we continue to try to learn how to harness that technology, whether it's podcasting, video games,
pencils,
magic things, pencils. I don't know. Let's try to come up with something fun. Harnessing it in classroom, whether you're teaching online or physical. We're just happy to keep talking about this, and we'll keep talking about it until NBC cancels.
Until then.
See ya.
See ya.